All right. Sorry, I thought I saw heard somebody call something to order or something. The audio is really tough too, so I'll try to repeat what I hear.
How's that?
Well, that sounded better.
Okay, I just turned my microphone on, that's all. All right, in the interest of time, it is 5 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get going. Call the special meeting of the Watertown Airport Board to order. We have an agenda item, an approval of the agenda. There is an addition to the agenda that I'll need to add and get a motion from somebody to approve a work order or change order for the jet bridge, and that'll be described later on, but we do need to add that onto the agenda. So we have a motion for that.
I'll make that motion, Chairman, that we amend the agenda to add that.
Motion by Mike Tomlinson, second by Wes Wilkins. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And just a note, we do have the full board is present or online. So. All right, so approval of the consent agenda, the meetings of the January 9th minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Wes, second.
I'll second that.
Second by one of the mics. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. We have opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody in the public or online that would like to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on to the regular agenda. So first item up is the authorization for the city manager to sign a letter of recommendation to the federal DOT for approval of Denver Air Connections proposal option 3 for Watertown's essential air service contract, the amount of $6,329,521 in the first year, with a 7% increase to $6,772,587 in year 2 for the 2-year contract. And this recommendation, option 3, is for continuing our service as currently provided through from Watertown to Denver and from Watertown to Chicago. Heath?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as everybody's full well aware, we're in the process of awarding a new essential air service contract. We're going through the federal process that's required by the federal DOT for communities that are taking part of the essential air service program. On a 2-year basis, we renew these contracts for who our essential air service provider is. Currently, we've been operating with Denver Air Connection. They've been treating us well, providing really good service to Denver and Chicago. Now that their current contract is coming to an end, we've gone through the bid process following the federal DOT regulations for that bid process. And we've seen one sole bidder to continue to provide essential air service to the community of Watertown, and that is Denver Air Connection. However, within their bid, they did propose 3 different options that came at different subsidy costs to the federal DOT. Those options are the current routes that we fly today to Denver and to Chicago. There was a second option to shift things up a little bit to go from Denver and then also to Minneapolis. And there was a third option to fly all Denver flights with no other major hub connection. So it was good to have those 3 options. It's good to have opportunities and consider alternate routes when we consider the air service that we provide to this region through the regional airport. From a staff standpoint, we've reviewed this pretty extensively with individual board members, with our consultant, Volair, with the airport manager, of course, and myself involved in those discussions, and the city manager being involved in several of those discussions as well. And some of the highlights that I'll point out on why we came to the recommendation that's on the action item here tonight, which is to go with the what we've been calling the status quo option, retaining Denver Air Connect with service to Denver and Chicago, Several considerations there that came to mind. I'll walk through those quick if I could, Mr. Chairman. For the community's sake on information sharing here and how we've derived at that recommendation. The first point I'd make is that there was concern with Denver Air Connect not having an interline baggage agreement with Delta through the Minneapolis option. And then pointing out the fact that they do have an interline baggage agreement with United through the Chicago flights. There's concern with that lack of an interline agreement in going to Minneapolis and what that might do to our employment numbers. Of course, it's a guess, it's a speculation. Anybody could make their own estimation what that might do to our employments. But without that interline agreement, and if we were to go to the Minneapolis route, there was concern that our employment numbers could dip enough to put us in jeopardy of meeting our required 10,000 employments annually. So that was a concern that we had as staff. The other part of the Minneapolis route that was of concern at this point is a potential shift in the flight times with our Denver route, and that too could have negative implications on our employments. If we were awarded the Minneapolis route and that caused the Denver route schedule to shift, we could lose a lot of our optimal connection times out of that Denver airport, and in effect reduce the number of people taking that flight, and again impact the employments. Another important factor here that we weighed out is there's some pending and potential interline agreements with Delta through Minneapolis, but they're not in place yet. So if and when Denver Air Connect is successful in achieving an interline agreement with Delta, that might make that Minneapolis connection all the more appealing to the community of Watertown. And if that were the case, let's say 12 months down the road, we have the option to entertain switching to going from Chicago to Minneapolis instead. All that would have to happen, generally speaking, is that the community has to be in favor of it. Denver Air Connect would have to be in favor of it. And we'd write a letter to the U.S. DOT in that matter requesting that we switch the Chicago route to Minneapolis. So there is opportunity there down the road that if the interline agreements get in place and things look more favorable for Minneapolis route, we can consider that in the future if the stars align, so to speak. The other reason for gravitating towards the Chicago route is that for what I just described and switching to the Minneapolis route, the inverse isn't true. If we start with Minneapolis and say, ooh, gosh, our employments are dipping quite a bit, we're pretty concerned here, can we have Chicago back? It's likely the USDOT would not look favorably upon that for a couple reasons. One of the bigger ones being the subsidy to go to Chicago is quite a bit more. It's a little over $800,000 more for that option. So Denver Air Connect, rightfully so, is going to want that $800,000 more. The USDOT is probably not going to fork out that money after we've settled for the Minneapolis route. So that was another note to make there. The other couple points that they're kind of ancillary. I've kind of talked through the bigger ones, but a piece of good news that we've received from Denver Air Connect is that they feel they're close to obtaining direct gate access at the Chicago airport. Right now, those that have flown that route realize that there's a shuttle situation. They have to be shuttled to the terminal, and it's not ideal, but it works. But Denver Air Connect has shared information that through their conversations recently, they're getting fairly close to securing gate access there at the Chicago airport. And the last point I'll make, that's just more of a sharing of information, is that of our 2022 employment numbers, which are a little over 14,000, approximately 60% of those passengers were Denver passengers, and about 40% of those were Chicago passengers. So there is a good presence of Chicago passengers that are using that current Chicago connection, and whether they're for leisure or business and flying through. And I just wanted to point that fact out too, because that was important in our assessment on which recommendation we'd make here. Informally, ATY has a Facebook page. We've been sharing this information publicly for a little while now through our airport board meetings, and a lot of the general, again, informal feedback we've gotten. It's been mixed, but I would say it has gravitated from the general public's responses to recommend that we go with Chicago. We've had a mixed input. Some folks would like the Minneapolis route, but I would say a vast majority have recommended Chicago based on the feedback we've received at the staff level. With that, Mr.
Heath,
Chairman,
This is
I'll
Mike. Heath, yeah,
pass
go
the floor
ahead,
back over.
All right, thank you, Heath. That's a great summary of all of the meetings and conversations that we've had. Somebody have something to say online? Mike?
No, keep going.
I just want to reiterate too that this is a decision we take seriously. You know, we do want to make sure that the traveling public has great service, and I do want to recognize Denver Air. They've been a great partner since we've had them here. They really work with us and want to provide good service and as flexible as they can be. So at this point, I'll take the motion for authorization for city manager to approve option 3 and to submit to city council for.
I'll make that motion to, the city recommend to accept the airport. Is it this one?
Push.
Okay. I'll make the motion, as stated here, for the city, make a recommendation to the city to accept the Denver Air Connection proposal as EAS provider. But that's option 3, as we had stated. I don't know if that's on here. Yeah, there it is.
So I have a motion for option 3. That would be the Watertown to Denver and Chicago routes. Do I have a second?
Second, Cartney.
Second by Mike Cartney. Any discussion?
This is Mike Cartney again. I would just concur with Heath that the feedback I've gotten, 5 out of 6 have said they prefer Chicago at this time.
Well, and Mike, I appreciate that. This is Mike Peterson. I've had the opposite feedback, but I think it's a moot point at this right now. But I do believe there is a more opportunity for business travel to go through the Minneapolis connection. I also think we have a better opportunity to get the Minneapolis approved, but I understand the direction that's chosen, so, or at least suggested.
Glenn, did you have?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd ask, maybe it's understood, but to the public that might be watching, Heath, do you want to explain what an interline agreement is for those that might not be aware of that terminology?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Councilman Vilhauer. Interline agreements are pretty much an agreement between separate airline companies that allow a passenger's baggage to pass through the destination. In a real short summary, that's what it amounts to. Without that interline agreement, what's required of the passengers, they go get their bags at the first stop or wherever wherever that break in that interline agreement would be. Typically, it's at first stop. So if we were to take the Minneapolis route, we don't have an interline agreement between DAC and Delta. Customers would have to get off at Minneapolis, get their bags, go back through security, recheck their bags to get on their next flight to connect out of or to continue on out of that airport.
Right, without and this is particularly ticketing and baggage agreement. So there's several different forms of interline, and one is a full code share where everything is seamless. It's one ticket, one airline. Even now we have ticketing and baggage agreements with United and with American through Denver Air. You still get 2 tickets, but the travel is linked in the event of an arrangement through Minneapolis with Delta, and that's the major carrier. You could still connect with United or American out of Minneapolis, but those routes are much more limited. But without without an interline or ticketing and baggage agreement with Delta, you effectively have 2 separate tickets and 2 separate itineraries. If you left Watertown with a connecting flight in Minneapolis, Delta doesn't know you're coming on another flight from another area. They're expecting you to show up at the gate, and so if there's a delay, they don't know you're coming, and that's really one of the major factors. Without a ticketing and baggage agreement, travel becomes much more cumbersome, especially if you're checking bags. If you're not checking bags, it's less cumbersome. It's similar to what we had with ADI, when we first started with them going to Denver, is you had 2 tickets, and if you're checking bags, you had to go back out through security and then back in again. You'd really need to plan upwards of 2.5 to 3 hour layover in the Twin Cities to make a connection to make sure you're going to get it. So that's one of the factors that really came in, is that ticketing and baggage agreement not being in place with Delta through Denver Air is one of the major factors that made the difference, and then some of the other things that Heath has spoken with as well.
Mr. Chair, Mike Tomlinson here. Got a few thoughts to this discussion.
Go ahead, Mike.
As intriguing as the Minneapolis connections are to me, and I'll throw self-disclosure out. I'm a million miler with Delta. I did a lot of flying with Delta over the years. I did speak at length with Thief River Falls, Minnesota's airport manager. They have a Minneapolis connection with Denver Air Connect without, of course, the ticket and bag agreement with Delta. And they have been growing their enplanements. They're a smaller airport than ours. It's an education process for their customer base, knowing that they've got to check their bag or claim their check bag in Minneapolis, et cetera. They've been growing their enplanements. I also spoke at length with Ironwood, Michigan. They are about half the size of Thief River Falls. So again, they're considerably smaller than us. They have Denver Air Connect providing service to Chicago and also to Minneapolis. So, similar in what we're discussing and considering here. Most of their traffic flows to Chicago. The Minneapolis portion of their traffic is fairly small, albeit growing a bit. Did a little more analysis with the data that Volair Consulting provided to us, and 87% of Minneapolis's flights are on Delta. That shouldn't surprise any of us. So they are clearly the dominant player in Minneapolis, whereby Delta is 5% of the flights in Chicago. United is the top carrier in Chicago with 52%, and then American and others would make up the remaining differences. Chicago has slightly better fares, over average overall fares, than Minneapolis does. Minneapolis, I think it was $188 average per fare in Chicago to a little over $200 in Minneapolis. Minneapolis has a bit better on-time performance, weather and mechanical issues. So, there's certainly pros and cons either direction. Initially, I started out with the thought that Minneapolis made more sense. I'll have to say, after looking at all of the issues and being a part of a lot of discussions, my position has shifted to favoring Chicago in this choice.
Thank you, Mike. And to keep in mind, this is a 2-year cycle, so we'll be revisiting this in 2 years when the bid cycle is up again. Any other input from the board? Any other staff input? All right, call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item is the added agenda item. That would be item B, and that is for a change order number 1C, final for the terminal site improvements, and this relates to the boarding bridge. Rob, do you want to?
Yeah, so it's a change order. There's 2 different items we need for the jet bridge. One was a regional jet adapter, basically a bridge to go from the boarding bridge to the aircraft. Some of the aircraft have handles that won't go down, so there was a gap. You'd have a boarding bridge to safely get on the aircraft. That was for the first one, for the regional jet adapter. The second one is a safety shoe for the same reasons. Sometimes with the doors, people would get out the aircraft and the jet bridge would bounce, and it was making contact with the door, so that we got a safety shoe so it would level out and would not cause any damage to the aircraft. With both these change orders, the total cost of the city is $363.39.
All right, so the change order increase was $7,267.74, and then with the cost share with federal and state, our part of it is the $300. Do we have a motion to approve that?
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Motion by Wes,
I'll second that, Mike.
second by Mike Tomlinson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Any old business? Any new business? I just have one item, and that was kind of tagging on to the Monday night's council meeting, where they were acknowledging some of the city staff. I do want to bring the airport staff on board with the snow removal. They've done a great job of keeping us open through a lot of ice and, trying to get things opened up and get the airplanes out on time. It's been mentioned to me several times from the local pilots that are flying too, keeping the hangars and things opened up. So we appreciate that and keeping the airport open. Thank you. No need for an executive session. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Mike Cartney, second by Mike Tomlinson. We'll be adjourned. Thank you.